Hey, today we're going to talk about our variables notes. So we should have our fill-ins ready to go. Here we go. So what are variables? Well, variables are those factors that will affect an experiment. And there are three types of variables that we're going to talk about. Number one, we call it the independent or the manipulative variable, dependent or responding variable, and number three, the controlled variables. So these are the things that will affect our experiment. Well, let's talk about the independent variable. Independent or manipulative variable is what I purposely change, and this is the clue. I in independent reminds you of the I purposely change it. It's the one thing that I purposely change in an experiment each time. It always goes on the x-axis, and this is the x-axis down here. It is the horizontal axis. Think of it as the cause, all right? Because I changed something in the experiment, and then that leads us to the dependent or the responding variable. It is what you measure or observe in the experiment. All right? It depends on what you change. It depends on the independent. It always goes on the y-axis, and this is the y-axis right here. It's the vertical. It goes up and down. It's the dependent axis. It is the effect. All right? It's the effect. All right, because you change the independent, this is what happens. This is what you're observing. This is what you're measuring. Dependent variable. Finally, controlled variable. Controlled variables are pretty simple. It's all the other factors in the experiment that remain the same, that we have to keep the same, because you only change one variable at a time. So these are controlled variables, everything that you keep the same in the experiment. Now here's a little mnemonic device to help you figure out and remember in which spots these variables go on the graph. Think about dry mix. Dry mix. D stands for dependent, R stands for responding, and Y stands for y-axis. Mix stands for manipulative or independent variable, which goes on the x-axis. So dry mix. Great way, simple way, really helps a lot of sixth graders remember this for tests and for the future. So just always remember dry mix, and that should help you remember where your variables would go and what each one is. Here's some of my former students explaining and reviewing variables with you.
Hey everybody, it's your reviewing about variables. Let's start off with a demonstration. I think the car will go farther down ramp number 1, but I think the car will go farther down ramp number 2. Well, let's test it then. My car went 1 meter and 58.5 centimeters. My car went 87 centimeters. I was right. In an experiment, there are 3 types of variables. The first type of variable is an independent variable. The independent variable is what you change in the experiment. In this experiment, independent variable is the length of the hill. And the second type of variable is the dependent variable. The dependent variable is the variable that is measured. In this experiment, the dependent variable is how far the car went down the ramp. And then the last type of variable is a controlled variable. A controlled variable is what you could change but don't. In this experiment, the controlled variable is the type of car that was pushed down the hill. Let's review. The independent variable is what you change. The dependent variable is what is measured. The controlled variable is what you could change but don't.
All right, very good. So that's a nice little review. Let's do a little birdie example and see how you guys do. So imagine you want to see what color of bird feeders your local birds out in our backyard are preferring. Do they prefer red feeders, blue feeders, or green feeders? Okay. So what are our variables? Well, what is it that I'm purposely changing? What am I, the independent variable? What is it that I'm changing? Well, I'm changing the color of the feeders, red, blue, and green. What is it that I'm measuring? The dependent. Well, I'm measuring. How will I know which feeder they prefer? Well, I'm going to measure the amount of seed that is being eaten out of each feeder. Finally, what are those things that I'm going to keep the same? I'm going to control them, keep them the same. Well, I want to keep the feeders in the exact same location. I want to put the same type of seed in each one, and I want to use the same type of feeder because I want to make sure that It's truly the color that's affecting this experiment. If everything except the independent variable is held constant, we can say that its experiment is fair. Only the independent variable can change. Is this experiment considered fair? Well, here we have 3 different colors of feeders, but is it in the same location? No, this one's in a tree, this one's on top of a house, this one's in a pine tree. And this one looks like it's a little lower to the ground. So not only did I not use the same location, I also didn't put them the same height off the ground. So this is not a fair experiment because I changed more than one variable. So why is it important, you ask, to change only one variable at a time? Because if you don't, then you won't know what's really causing the results. So was it the color of the feeder or was it the location that affected it? We won't know. Here's another example. Do plants grow better in clay or sandy soil? Well, 2 groups of the same plant were planted in the soil. Group 1 was planted in clay. Group 2 was planted in sandy soil. All right, let's take a look at the variables. What is it, the one thing that I changed? What's the independent? I changed the type of soil. What are we measuring? How will we know whether the soil affected it? Well, dependent, what I'm measuring is the plant height. I'm going to measure the height of the plant to see. Finally, what is it controlled? What is everything that I'm keeping the same? I'm watering each plant with the same amount of water. I put the same amount of sunlight on each one. I put them in the same type of container, and I have the same type of plant. Those are my controlled variables, things I keep the same, so it's a fair experiment. Okay, that's our variable review. Pretty quick. Here's our final question. At the bottom of your notes, simply write down at least one question you still have about variables at the bottom of your notes. Come prepared to discuss in class. All right, see you in class.